Hello, my name is Lisa Arkin. I'm Executive Director of Beyond Toxics, and I'm so pleased to share this video recording of an event we held on October the 10th in Corvallis, Oregon. The title of that event was Buried Trash: How Landfills Pollute Our Future and What We Can Do About It. Beyond Toxics is an environmental justice organization. That means that when vulnerable communities find themselves up against conditions that threaten their health and their communities, we are ready to help them out. We stand ready and we work deeply in community to bring environment and climate justice to people everywhere throughout Oregon. Our connection to Coffin Butte and the topic of landfills is the natural outcome of our work for a number of years in partnership with downwind communities and allies such as Clean Air Now and Picoon, who live in the shadow of the Covanta waste incinerator. Years of grassroots organizing have brought about significant legislation to make change, such as Senate Bill 488, a bill sponsored by Senator Deb Patterson to make Oregon the first state in the nation to require continuous emissions monitoring and publicly accessible access to the information for dioxin, PCBs, heavy metals, and some other very harmful toxic chemicals. The relationship between the Covanta waste incinerator and the Coffin Butte landfill is through their toxic outputs. Covanta sends truckloads and truckloads of toxic incinerator ash to Coffin Butte to spread over their trash piles every day as what they call a daily alternative cover. This ash can then become airborne as small particles and be breathed in to nearby communities, or it can add to the toxic leachate that um, is caused by the landfill and drips through those trash piles to come out on the other end as contamination to groundwater or to be collected in vast amounts and trucked to either the Corvallis or the Salem municipal wastewater system for treatment. However, it's very difficult to treat the chemicals in leachate, including the forever chemicals, PFAS. And so much of this gets dumped into the Willamette River, which serves as the drinking water source for communities downstream. You will hear from three speakers tonight about how Coffin Butte and other landfills present a crisis scenario for climate acceleration, a growing toxic problem for communities, a threat to our air and our water, plus the toll of plastic trash that is contaminating our waterways, including our ocean ecosystems. Our first speaker is Alyssa Ruida. Alyssa is the climate justice organizer at Beyond Toxics. She graduated from the University of Oregon with a degree in marine biology, and she has worked with Beyond Toxics for 2 years. Our second speaker is Anya Brandon. Anya is the Associate Director of U.S. Plastics Policy at Ocean Conservancy. She's worked there to advance policy solutions at the state and federal levels to reduce single-use plastics, hold plastic producers accountable, and support the transition to a circular economy. Our third speaker is Catherine Blauvelt. She leads the Work for Industrious Labs, and she is the campaign director for the Circular Economy Campaign, where she is working to drive initiatives to reduce landfill methane emissions and promote organic waste diversion. Catherine has over 20 years of experience in coalition building, overseeing and leading large-scale development projects, and working on state and federal economic and energy policy development. I know you'll enjoy all three of our speakers, and please send us an email if you'd like to join our event email alert list, info@beyondtoxics.org. These Recordings will be available on the Beyond Toxics website. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Alyssa Rueda. I am the Climate Justice Organizer with Beyond Toxics. My presentation today will be on the community impacts from Coffin Butte landfill. So why is this landfill an environmental justice issue? Generally, communities located near landfills are exposed to both air and water pollution, and exposure to these pollutants and their associated toxins are linked to various health risks. Volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and particulate matter, PM, come from landfills themselves, but there is also the issue of VOCs and PM coming from the trucks and bulldozers needed to maintain a landfill. Depending on the type of VOC and the size of the PM, the body responds in different ways. The implications may vary from coughing or wheezing to more chronic issues such as asthma or cancer. Another byproduct of a landfill is leachate, which forms when rainwater filters through the waste in a landfill. Leachate is a chemical soup of dissolved organic matter, synthetic organic compounds, and heavy metals. The heavy metals in leachate can deteriorate surface and groundwater quality. They are also bioaccumulative, meaning they accumulate in our bodies and other living things, and they are carcinogenic, meaning they can cause cancer. Here in Oregon, the leachate ends up in the Willamette River and surrounding groundwater. Arsenic is another derived concern from leachate contamination because it is a component of leachate, and it's concerning due to its ability to contaminate drinking water. In Coffin Butte, we believe that arsenic is leaking out of the landfill due to the elevated levels reported in nearby monitoring wells. And on a global scale, methane and carbon dioxide are greenhouse gases produced by landfills that are trapping heat within our atmosphere and accelerating global warming. In general, the effects of global warming are going to be felt by vulnerable communities first. So now we'll discuss Coffin Butte landfill. In 1944 to 45, this area was a World War II dump site for Camp Adair. In 1948 to 1973, the site was turned into an open burn dump and an incinerator was built. The life expectancy at this point was 5 to 6 years. But in 1973, there was an application for an expansion. There were 200 signatures to oppose the expansion because, quote, the Coffin Butte dump, never a wise choice given its wind patterns and heavy clay soils, which makes daily cover impossible in the heavy winter rain periods, and it must be phased out by 1975. The expansion was approved due to the argument of running out of space and a lack of alternatives. Today, we are facing the same issue. Not enough space and no alternatives but to expand the landfill. But let's first take a look at where the waste stream is entering Coffin Butte landfill today. We see that almost 90% of the waste entering the landfill is from outside of Benton County, with only 11% coming from within Benton County. So, Benton County is the most at risk from the existence of this landfill and any proposed expansion from now and into the future. And the people of Benton County don't have much power in the decision-making process when it comes to the landfill. Meanwhile, almost 90% of the waste entering this landfill is from outside of Benton County. Benton County takes in 1/3 of Oregon's garbage and garbage from 2 other states. So the way things are managed here can set the stage for how other landfills are managed in Oregon. The landfill site comprises 740 acres. Of that, 178 acres are permitted for waste disposal. The landfill site includes 556 acres dedicated to act as a contamination buffer and for non-landfill operations. Coffin Butte landfill has purchased a lot of surrounding land to create this contamination buffer that they can now expand into. But expanding the landfill only exacerbates the environmental impacts put on the community. In 2020, Republic Services negotiated a decade-long franchise agreement that became effective in 2021. And in May of 2021, Republic Services applied to Benton County for a conditional use permit, also known as a CUP, to expand the landfill south of its current operations. Public concern and opposition became very apparent, and at a planning commission meeting, more than 100 residents signed up to testify. The ones that could testify all opposed the expansion. Community concerns included road closure, odor, litter on the highway, and other nearby roads. The main concern was this road closure. The proposed expansion includes the privatization of Coffin Butte Road, which would close it off to the public. Coffin Butte Road is the most accessible transportation route existing in Soap Creek Valley. In the case of an emergency such as a fire, residents of Soap Creek Valley would have to use Tampico Road. But this is an unsafe evacuation route because it takes longer to get to the highway. And Tampico Road zigzags through Soap Creek Valley instead of going straight through, like Coffin Butte Road does. And Tampico goes through the forest, which can be dangerous in the case of a fire. Not to mention the constant leachate trucks, ash trucks, garbage trucks, and debris that would be on Coffin Butte Road if it is privatized through the expansion. This is a public road that needs to remain public. After the 2021 proposal, the Planning Commission denied the expansion of Coffin Butte landfill, but Republic Services quickly appealed the decision and then withdrew their appeal with the intention of applying for a new CUP this year in 2023. But since their 2021 expansion proposal, the concern of leachate, odor, arsenic, and road litter have only grown. Today, Republic Services is expected to apply for another expansion. They want to expand their operations to the south. And we want to mention that Coffin Butte landfill currently has a tonnage cap of 1.1 million and is predicted to reach its capacity sometime between 2037 and 2039. The proposed expanded area, however, will not have a tonnage cap to limit the amount of waste entering. So with no tonnage cap for the expanded area, Republic Services can import an unlimited amount of waste, in turn potentially shortening the projected lifetime of the landfill. So even with an expansion, the landfill's lifetime could still be shortened. And this loophole will only increase the financial burden that Benton County will face due to leachate leakage, arsenic contamination, and other end-of-life costs due to the landfill. And the bigger the landfill, the more leakage and the more maintenance it will need. Whether or not the landfill expands, Benton County is already going to be burdened with the consequences of having a landfill. The question is, how big is this burden going to be? So thank you all so much again for being here and watching this and allowing me to speak on the subject. We are so lucky to have Catherine and Anya here to dive into the long-term pollution issues associated with waste and landfills, as well as give us some ideas to divert different types of waste out of our waste stream before it even enters a landfill, and how this can be reflected in policy reform.
Well, thank you again, Lisa, and Beyond Toxics for having me. I'm so excited to be here to talk to you guys about single-use plastics and their growing impact on the environment, both in the form of pollution and landfilling and under end-of-life disposal challenges. Quickly, a little bit about Ocean Conservancy, which is where I work. We are an environmental nonprofit that's nearly 50 years old, whose goal is to work with you to protect the ocean from today's greatest global challenges. One of those is, of course, plastic and our overconsumptive nature. And really working together, we envision a healthier world or healthier ocean protected by a more just world. I spend a lot of my time thinking about and looking at images like this, where plastic is a horrible pollutant in our ocean. We know that the ocean has really been the ground zero of a lot of our ocean plastic pollution crisis. But I want to talk about how we got there and how plastics are polluting other aspects of our environment and our communities. This is a graph I made a lifetime ago, back when I was a researcher, that shows the exponential increase in plastic production over time. So we've been making plastics now for a little bit over 100 years. And you can see within the last several decades, we've really increased to a near exponential rate of plastic consumption and use. And while this started back in the 1960s in the post-World War II era with the throwaway culture and convenience culture, we know it was fueled more recently by the shale and fracking boom here in the United States and other places that really led to an abundance of the feedstock for all of our plastics, which are fossil fuels. In this way, the supply of fossil fuels has really driven what we now experience as the demand for all of these single-use plastics. And really, those single-use plastics, like these products I'm showing here on the slide, are exactly what has been driving this crisis. And just to put into a little bit more context, half of all plastics ever made have been made in the last 20 years, which really goes to show the exponential rate of this problem and how quickly we've gotten out of control. And it's no secret that our current system for managing all of this waste is falling way short, with the results being devastating, including 11 million metric tons of plastic entering the ocean each and every year from land-based sources alone. And if we look at how some of that plastic is getting out into our environment and our ocean, this image here on the slide shows what our dream circular economy would be. So all of this material being used, recycled, and then turned back into new material over and over and over again. But we know this is simply not the case and not what's happening. Globally, less than 9% of plastics have ever been recycled. 69% of the most common items we find in our ocean plastic pollution could not be recycled in the first place. This really shows how the challenge with a lot of these single-use plastics and products we're using is that they are not made to be recycled or not designed to be recycled to begin with. And just to put a finer point on this, 6 out of the top 10 items that we most commonly see in our beach cleanups, in our beaches and waterways are single-use plastics. This is really driving our overall production of plastics. 40% of plastics produced each and every year are for packaging, which is often used a single time before being thrown away. And our recycling system is really failing to keep up with all of the waste that we're generating, in no small part because there's nearly 10,000 separate recycling systems in the United States alone. So what you can recycle where you live, where you work, where you're visiting your friend can end up being very, very different, leading to confusion and contamination. And stopping this crisis really does start with us, the United States. We produce just under a fifth of the world's total plastics, largely from that shale and fracking boom I mentioned earlier. And even beyond that, we rely very heavily on exporting our waste overseas. So traditionally, we have exported most of our non-recyclables or things that we collect in the recycling system that are more difficult to recycle overseas. A lot went to China and other countries in Southeast Asia. And in 2018, that changed when China and other countries decided they did not want any more of our waste. They had enough of their own plastics and recycling to manage. They didn't need ours on top of it. And so this led to a real change in the circumstances on the ground here in the United States, which has driven so many folks to talk about how do we attack this issue from the systemic level. Without being able to export our waste overseas, our trash, specifically these plastics, are literally piling up either at recycling centers or in the streets or in a dump where they end up going instead. So since that national sword policy passed in China, we've seen an increased rate in landfilling or incinerating our plastics rather than recycling them because we never invested in a recycling system that works. And so if we look holistically, the US is really responsible for a lot of our ocean plastic pollution crisis. We use the most plastic out of any country in the world. And it's not just because we're the biggest country. We actually use twice as much plastic per capita as other countries that are similarly developed, like the European Union. And when you take all of these factors into consideration, we rank as high as the number 3 country in terms of contributing to our ocean plastic pollution crisis. Some other challenges that we know come with plastics and single-use plastics when they end up in the environment or in a landfill or an incinerator is that plastics contain chemical additives. So if we look at these plastic products, plastics are made up of plastic, so these polymers or little blue chains like I'm showing here on the slide that look like friendship bracelets. And then in and around all of those little friendship bracelets are chemical additives, additives that are used to help manufacture a plastic or give it a certain quality or color or attribute. These chemicals are importantly not connected to the rest of the plastic. They're not bound together, which means they're free to be released out of the plastic depending on the environmental condition. So if they get hot or slightly degraded by the sun, or if they find themselves in an acidic environment or a salty environment, sometimes these chemicals can actually leach out. And that has known human health impacts, including endocrine disruption, neurotoxicity, and an increased rate in cancer. There's actually over 13,000 chemicals associated with the plastics industry writ large. And on average, these types of plastics that we interact with on a day-to-day basis, these single-use plastics and packaging can contain around 7% of these chemicals by mass. That's nearly 1/10 of the entire weight of that plastic could be just these chemical additives. Another emerging concern that we have to deal with from the plastic and plastic pollution are microplastics. About 11% of all of the plastics that end up in our ocean each and every year are these microplastics, so plastics that are under 5 millimeters in size. 5 millimeters you can still see with your eye, but some of these microplastics get much, much smaller, such that they're essentially invisible to the naked eye. Some major sources include, primary production of plastic, so these little plastic pellets that we then use to make other plastic products, as well as a lot of secondary sources, so microplastics that have broken down or been shed from other single-use plastic items as they break down or exposed to the elements in nature. That can include stormwater that contains things like car tire dust. It contains synthetic textiles and microfibers that shed from all of our clothes in the wash. And of course, there's known other sources like landfill leachate, which you'll hear a lot more about with our next speaker. We know that humans now are known to take in these microplastics through the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. And some of these microplastics actually get into our body and stay there, causing not fully understood harm. We've seen microplastics in our lung, in our bloodstream, and in the placenta, meaning that newborn babies are already exposed to these plastics. The plastics is also really fueling our climate crisis. As I said, these are fossil fuel products, and it takes a lot of oil and energy to make these plastics. This has also been a backup plan or a plan B for a lot of the fossil fuel industry as we move to decarbonize and use less fossil fuels in things like energy production and transportation. And the emissions from plastics are highest during that production phase, so extraction and using energy to actually turn those raw fossil fuel materials into plastics, as well as end-of-life disposal. And how you dispose of those plastics can really drive how much greenhouse gas emissions are associated. We do know what we need to do to tackle this crisis, though, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. There's been great research and models out there that have shown what it's going to take to address this crisis. And it's really three big things. First, we need to make less plastics to begin with, 25 to 40% less, with higher income countries like the United States needing to drive at that 40% decrease. We need to better manage the waste that we do make and use. This means investing in better recycling and composting and making sure that we're collecting and actually recycling those materials. And we're going to need to continue targeted cleanups in the environment of the plastics that are both already out there and will continue to get into the ocean and other environments. But how we manage this plastic waste does matter. So if we look at this top row here, this is how we make plastics to begin with. So as I mentioned, we have fossil fuel products that then get turned into the basic building blocks of plastics called monomers. Those monomers then get strung together into that friendship bracelet called a polymer, which then gets processed into these little plastic resin beads. These are the same beads that can sometimes escape into our environment as microplastics. Those little beads then get sent around the country to be turned into all of the plastic products we're incredibly familiar with, like a plastic water bottle. But then what we do with the end of that bottle really dictates some of those greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts. So when we dispose of it, we have certain options. We could reuse that water bottle, especially if it's designed to be reused. We could recycle it through mechanical recycling, which is the current recycling system we have, or we could chemically recycle or incinerate that bottle, which leads to, the regeneration of fossil fuels or energy. So if we look at some of those impacts, we know that all of these processes are inherently polluting. There's not really a great option for these plastics other than to reduce them in the first place. But we know there are trade-offs associated with these different end of lives. So we can look at the impacts and kind of go from there to decide what is the best option. Do any of these options displace the need for more virgin plastic material? That drives so much of the greenhouse gas impact and really locks us into fossil fuel infrastructure. Do any of these options release more air and water emissions or greenhouse gas emissions? Do they release microplastics into the environment? And are there impacts on the surrounding and neighboring communities? So if we look at all of these options from landfilling, incinerating, mechanical recycling, chemical, and reuse and refill, we can see that there are some clear winners and losers. Reuse and refill is by far the best option for plastics, really driving at that goal to reduce the amount of new plastics in the first place. Then mechanical recycling, which does help displace that need for new plastic material. Then we have landfilling, chemical recycling, and incinerating, all kind of lumped together as our last choice, because ultimately it's not providing us any new plastic material. So we are locked in to getting more virgin material from fossil fuels with any of those options. And it's not really a surprise to see these outcomes. It really does follow the waste management hierarchy that the EPA has set up for years, where we need to reduce and reuse first, followed by recycling, and then other options. And if we think about our comprehensive approach here, that also makes sense. We do need to reduce, and then to better manage our plastics, we should be looking at those mechanical recycling strategies in addition to the cleanup. And while this seems incredibly daunting to accomplish all of this at once, we have evidence for our ability to do this. And this is a bill that we helped work on last year in California called SB 54, which was the strongest plastics legislation ever passed in the United States. So looking first at that waste management piece, it set up an extended producer responsibility program for plastic producers, which is essentially a polluter pays model that will require the maker of all of these plastic products to actually pay for the end of life management of those products. Oregon actually just set up a very similar, passed a similar bill, SB 582, and we will now see this coming to Oregon as well. Above and beyond, it actually requires that all of those single-use packaging put on the market, whether it's plastic or aluminum or glass, actually be recyclable or compostable. And that's so critical in making sure that whatever material we're using can be reused again and again and again to make sure we're not dependent on virgin or new material. It also requires the first ever reductions of single-use plastics, 25% by 2032. So we are setting a baseline for how many plastics, single-use plastics, are on the market this year, and producers will be forced to decrease that by 25% by both weight and number of plastic items. And 10% of that reduction has to come from directly eliminating an unnecessary piece of plastic or investing in that reuse and refill technology that we know is really where we need to get in the future. And lastly, it invests nearly $5 billion over 10 years, paid for by the producers of plastic, as well as those resin makers, so those big petrochemical companies that are producing plastics in the first place, to clean up and remediate California's environment, which has been impacted by plastic pollution. Importantly, 60% of that is actually prioritized to go to communities that have disproportionately been impacted. So disadvantaged, low-income, rural, and environmental justice communities are prioritized for receiving some of this funding because we know they've been impacted first and worst by so many impacts from plastic throughout its life cycle. And just to put it into context, that 25% reduction is huge. We did some back of the envelope calculations and found that it'll lead to a reduction in about 23 million tons of plastic, which is the same weight as 26 times the Golden Gate Bridge. So just an absolutely staggering volume of plastic that we will be reducing in California, which means that plastic won't end up being produced, will have less greenhouse gas emissions, and won't end up either clogging up our recycling stream or ending up in a landfill or an incinerator. So this all seems incredibly daunting, but we know we can do it, and we already are. So we really do have better solutions for our plastics than just to put them in a landfill. And with that, I will stop there and turn it over to Catherine to learn a little bit more about some of the challenges with our current landfills.
Wonderful. Well, I'm Catherine Blauvelt, Circular Economy Director for Industrious Labs, and just a huge and deep appreciation to Beyond Toxics, VNEX, all the co-hosts of this event. Quick background on Industrious Labs. We work with state and local organizations and communities to clean up heavy industry and create more benefit for community. And that happens through network building, through sharp data analysis, and campaigning. So I'll be sharing with you a short presentation giving an overview on landfills, emissions, their impacts, and the benefits of taking action. So first and foremost, I'm not here with doom and gloom. You actually don't have to split an atom or do a moonshot program to see the benefits of not burying and burning waste. There are proven strategies, and we'll talk through some of them that have great benefits, and you see some of those benefits listed here. Just pulling out one of them, Gaia, which is an international nonprofit, did a study across 16 countries and found that composting and semi-mechanized recycling creates many times more jobs per year than the status quo landfilling. And that kind of makes sense intuitively when you think about it. And those job alternatives can actually be more stable and have family sustaining wages and be safe, which is really important. So just one example of many. So now that we know what the benefits are at a high level of taking action and not burning and burying waste, let's take a step back and we'll go through emissions and what we know about them at landfills, their impacts, and what we can do about them. I'll first dig into greenhouse gas emissions and global warming and really give you some examples specific to Oregon and the Coffin Butte landfill. So one reason we're talking about this is we're looking for effective solutions to combat climate change, which is a present crisis. The Global Methane Hub has said reducing methane gas is the fastest way to address climate change in the short term. Methane is a super pollutant. Its 20-year global warming potential is about 80 times more than carbon dioxide. So the flip side of that is you get an immediate positive benefit when you even cut methane a little bit, right? Positive benefit to our atmosphere and slowing that rate of temperature change. So how does that happen? What's the science? And this is a slide that helps you understand that. A simplified way to think about it is bacteria is eating up the organic waste. And when that happens and there's no oxygen, it creates methane gas along with a few sort of other pollutants. The EPA has said methane production typically runs 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and more after the waste is disposed of. So we really see the impacts of putting organic waste in a landfill, and you see all the different kinds here are really with us for decades to come. So what does that all mean? This slide gives you a sense of the US statistics, and it shows the 20-year global warming potential of our estimated landfill emissions in this country. These are really big numbers, clearly. Landfill methane emissions, unfortunately, are likely even higher than what this represents. A recent Columbia University study estimates 3 times greater than what you see here. And that's in part because the formulas that make up these numbers are formulas. They're overly simplistic. They miss important factors like the type of cover a landfill uses or whether or not the gas collection system is actually working. So at any given landfill, you could have higher emissions or lower emissions. That's an issue. A lot of the barriers that we see when we think about landfill emissions have to do with transparency, right? Out of sight, out of mind. This is an industry that's been in the dark for many years for most of us. So Industrious Labs created this website. You see it here, don'twasteourfuture.org, to just provide the information that we do have. And it's information down to the community level of those landfill operators that have to report their estimated greenhouse gas emissions to the EPA. So providing that to everyone. And in fact, Industrious Labs looked at that EPA data and found in the majority of states, municipal solid waste landfills are the single largest industrial contributor of methane. And you see here, Oregon, this is just a screenshot of the Oregon website and dashboard, which you can go to online, and you can see here, yep, 90% municipal solid waste landfills are responsible for 90% of industrial methane emissions in Oregon. And you also see our top 10 emitters, right? In that bar chart, most of them, again, are landfills. And of course, this is only displaying the emissions once that organic waste is put into the landfill. Just think for a moment about all the emissions associated with producing that food and the cardboard and paper, right? That is then wasted, right? Emissions from the agriculture sector, water, precious water that's being used. So this is really just the tip of the iceberg. But let's go down to the community level and to the Coffin Butte landfill. Here are statistics that the landfill operator reports to the EPA. These are the latest numbers we have. And by those numbers that are reported, Coffin Butte is one of the larger emitters of methane in the state of Oregon. But that's not necessarily the whole story. And going back to the numbers that we've been talking about as formulas, we have technology that can really be a game changer. And that is direct measurement, actual measurement of methane emissions. And so we have scientific-based nonprofits like Carbon Mapper and others that are flying or using satellites that are circling the globe, pinpointing and identifying super emitters and emissions of methane plumes from all sorts of different industries. And here you see the emissions that Carbon Mapper has identified simply from landfills. That's a lot of emissions. And then unfortunately, we have seen, and Carbon Mapper has picked up methane plumes actually over the Coffin Butte landfill itself. So these are screenshots from the Carbon Mapper website that everyone can go to themselves. And this is a moment in time, right? So it's not showing continuous emissions, but on this day in July, this is what was detected. So you can also take a step back and think about, what about all the other days for all the other landfills and for Coffin Butte? It raises some serious questions. And then here's a close-up, right, of those shots or those snapshots of time, so you can really see what the detection looks like. It says not yet quantified in terms of the methane emission. That simply indicates that there's something about the on-the-ground conditions on that day that means that quantification isn't there. Clearly, there's a methane plume. So let's take a step back. Why do landfills leak methane? And they don't just leak methane, they leak other potent air emissions and leachate in the groundwater or water. So the bottom line is landfills are going to leak. That methane wants to come out of the landfill. And this is a simplified diagram from RMI that shows some of the common failure points of why emissions come out of landfills. I don't have time to go through every single one, but just to give you a couple examples, there's absolutely a need to install and effectively operate gas collection and capture systems. Landfills are very dynamic. They're not static, but rather if it rains, if it's really wet, right, that can generate more methane production. Leachate could build up in the gas collection system, and that could make it less effective in catching the gases. The cover could erode over time, right? It requires constant vigilance. So that example of really needing well-operated and monitored gas collection systems is really important for the lessening the methane coming out of that landfill. And then another example is finding the methane leaks. If you don't find them, that will be obviously an immediate failure. And right now, not all of a landfill surface is checked for leaks, okay? According to the EPA national standard, which governs the bigger landfills in this country, individual has to walk around the landfill 4 times a year. That's it, 4 times a year, and monitor on a grid pattern that's 100 feet by increments. 100 feet is a basketball court's length. So if you can imagine a person standing on a very large surface area of a landfill and having to look across and find those tiny surface cracks or cover integrity issues or that gas failure point in the collection system, right? It's going to be hard to catch all the leaks. Now, Oregon, thanks to your previous governor, actually updated its landfill emissions regulations to be more effective and more stringent than most states. And so in Oregon, the landfill monitoring standard is a 25 feet grid pattern as opposed to 100. So that's useful and a really important improvement, but it still requires that the landfill operator follow that. And that's where we bring forward another data point and information, which is that the EPA conducts inspections across this country of many industries, not just landfills. And that inspection program is able to look at some, certainly a small percentage of all landfills in this country, but they happen to visit Coffin Butte landfill last summer. And we have the results of that inspection report from a public records request. And as you see here, and that's a picture that was part of the inspection report where one of the methane leaks was found. The EPA found broad exceedances over the allowable limit of 500 parts per million of methane. So really concerning. And in fact, they found in one case or one area, flammable accumulations, or explosive levels that could indicate a concern. So certainly very troubling. And then this is from Mason Levitt of Beyond Toxics Oregon, this slide. And so this is trying to give you a aerial or map representation of where all of the different methane exceedances were found and the different levels of exceedances. As you can see, a number of them are way beyond the allowable limit. And there are also some tarp tears that are indicated there and found by community members. So yet another area of potential concern and question at Coffin Butte. I'll show you a couple pictures. This is one of them. This was a picture taken by EPA inspectors. This was an announced inspection, I should say, of Coffin Butte landfill. This is the tarp slope. And according to the EPA, it's showing a buildup of gas that's actually inflating those tarps. You see them sort of lifting up over the slope. This is another shot of the tarp slope showing a buildup of gas inflating the tarps. Republic did dispute that statement from the EPA and said it was the wind. And then you see that flag there. That is, again, many exceedances were found. That flag indicates exceedance over the allowable limit of methane. by an animal burrow or through an animal burrow. So clearly creating space for methane to come out. So a lot of concerning findings around the Coffin Butte landfill. We know landfills have serious emissions impacts that harm our climate and our communities, but it's not the only impact. And I want to acknowledge Alyssa's presentation that's sharing harms and the experience that the community around Coffin Butte landfill has had. So I want to take a step back and look at the impacts that landfills have beyond emissions. So this slide is attempting to give you just a few of the categories of impacts. As an example, over, let's see, in 2021, 31 million gallons of leachate was pumped out of the Coffin Butte landfill and trucked to wastewater treatment plants. But that's not all the leachate, right? So they weren't able to capture all of it. So then the question remains, what are all of those, materials, chemicals, buildup concentrations, right? How are they impacting the local soil and groundwater? And then another important impact to highlight is just how much disproportionate harm the Coffin Butte community or people around Coffin Butte are bearing for waste that is not theirs, right? The community did not create all of the trash that is in the Coffin Butte landfill, not even more than 10%, right? So that really raises a question of, why is the community bearing all of that? And why don't we have a solution that really allows all communities to take responsibility? And in terms of impacts, we have to just start with the real life experiences of people. And this is just providing one example of a mom and person who lives quite close to the landfill and how they're impacted. Beyond Toxics actually surveyed Adair Village residents and found 60% of those surveyed reported smelling the landfill. 20% of residents reported having at least one experience where they had to avoid outdoor activities because of the smell, right? So it's those quality of life experiences and having, the trash blow onto the road and people's properties from all of those garbage trucks, right, coming day in and day out. Is quite challenging. But let's not forget, if you live by a landfill or not, we're all impacted. And this is just giving you, again, one data point in terms of that impact of this make-take waste system that we're all living under, right? It costs money. It costs tax dollars to pay the landfill operator, to pay for all those trucks hauling trash many, many miles up to Coffin Butte and down to Coffin Butte. And there's also so much wasted food and wasted resources that are going into the landfill. Nationally, wasted surplus food costs our country $444 billion. And here you have the Oregon statistic and how it's costing Oregon's families. So now what can we do about it? Because many states and communities have taken action and found better solutions than the status quo. And this is where we know it will take actions that are really addressing the waste that we're stuck with, right? Where we have these landfills, they're creating these potent emissions and other harms to communities. We got to do a better job at taking care of that. And then we also know the most effective solution is to never put organic waste in the landfill in the first place. And you see that 95% methane reduction potential. That's an EPA statistic. It's a staggering number, right? If we composted, did anaerobic digestion, right, compared to landfilling, huge methane reduction potential. And there's a lot of good cost-benefit analysis out there. Massachusetts instituted diversion of organic waste from large operators, from landfills, and found it generated over 900 jobs, $175 million in economic activity, right? There's a lot of good that can come once you start implementing other solutions. And then this is a slide from NRDC or statistics from NRDC, just giving you the emissions numbers a different way. And again, that's a lot of potential reductions. So we really got to focus on keeping organic waste out of landfills. This is from Californians Against Waste, just giving you all sorts of different snapshots of organic waste diversion But Oregon's neighbor, Washington State, right to the north, just last year passed a law with bipartisan support, making it the 9th state in the country to keep organic waste out of landfills. And so it establishes a goal, 75% reduction of the amount of organic materials going into landfills, and it requires edible food being recovered, right? We have food recovery opportunities that are just sitting there waiting to happen once the status quo of just dumping everything in the trash is disrupted. So Washington State has taken action. We also know California has. It's a great chance for Oregon to follow its neighbors. So, to recap, we need that better enforcement and monitoring at landfills today to deal with the emissions we're stuck with, and then really emphasizing that let's have a policy solution that focuses on keeping waste out of landfills. Now, on the dealing with landfill emissions that we are living with today, we have so many technological, ready to go strategies that can help us. And this is a screenshot from a recent EPA webinar on drone technology. Drones are doing many functions today. They are delivering blood to remote hospitals, right? They can certainly and are flying over landfills to detect emissions, right? And that can really help us find those large super emission events, right? Much more quickly than the current system. And this is an example. It happens to be from Sniffer Drone, again, from a recent EPA webinar that shows really like the power of doing that survey. It's kind of like a reconnaissance mission that the drone does. They can go in there and follow up by foot, right? And figure out what that problem was. What was the leak? And then again, we have small communities, large communities, from the Twin Cities to North Carolina to Washington, right, that are implementing programs and education for folks to recycle their organic waste, to do backyard composting, or to put their organic waste in green bins. Oregon has some catching up to do with other states. ReFed, which is a national nonprofit and working on food waste prevention and reduction, analyzed all states' policies and how they deal with food waste, and found Oregon's food labeling policies were actually negative. They apparently make it more confusing for folks that are trying to understand what food is safe to eat. They have no policy. Oregon has no statewide policy promoting organic waste recycling. They also have a negative rated policy on animal feed and helping, right, food waste become animal feed, and a moderate policy, so doing a decent job ensuring food safety. So Oregon, again, has catching up to do, but fortunately, there's plenty of examples of success that we can draw from. And even Oregon itself, right, like in state laws, you can see here, does have the foundational building blocks, if you will, right, to define waste prevention as an important priority. And also a department within Oregon provides educational campaign resources, right, to help people and consumers and businesses reduce their food waste. So that's a start. And then the best part about this is, and the best part about taking action now, is that the federal government, through the Inflation Reduction Act, has this large funding source, $4.3 billion competitive grants available to reduce pollution. And so that's a great opportunity for the state of Oregon, for local communities to raise their hand and say, we have a waste system that can be improved, and we're going to see immediate emissions reduction benefits and benefits to community if we implement organic waste diversion strategies. So that's a great opportunity. So I just want to say thank you again to everyone who's attending and listening and being part of this important conversation. Thanks.